Herzlich willkommen zum The Unleash People Podcast, dem Podcast für alle, die HR und Talent Acquisition strategisch denken. Wir, Ina und Christian, liefern euch gemeinsam mit Expertinnen und Experten regelmäßig frische Insights, die euch und euer Unternehmen voranbringen. Heute sprechen wir mit Jim Miller, VP People und Talent bei Ashby, über datengetriebenes Recruiting und wie ihr unnötige Interviews vermeiden könnt. So, folks. This is my very first podcast, and I actually have a very prominent guest here, Jim Miller from Ashby. Hi, Jim. Thank you for joining me.
Christian, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for asking me to come along.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm a bit nervous, but let's see what's coming out of that. Basically, Jim and I met probably half a year ago at a conference in Amsterdam, and we ended up standing at the bar and discussing recruiting, something I usually do with folks. And well, we had a very interesting conversation about how to reduce unnecessary interviews in the recruiting process. And Jim, just share your thoughts on that, and let me know what you think about that.
Yeah, I'm passionate about the use of time and the different mechanisms that you can have with time. And what we were talking about was the reduction of superfluous interviews in process. And I think that the way to go about that is to ensure that only the very best candidates for a role are getting into the hiring manager's calendar. And in order to do that, you actually have to go slower to then go quicker. The traditional methodology of recruiting is you have a job posted and you get referrals and inbound and some source candidates, and then you look through, and the ones that look good, you move them forward in the process, and maybe there's an approval from the hiring manager, maybe you just schedule them, whatever it happens to be. But those people start to get into the calendar spaces and they start to fill up those calendar slots. And then as a recruiter, you see this candidate, you're like, wow, they're amazing. How good are they? They're perfect for this job. And then you move them forward and you realize, I can't actually interview them for 10 days because the hiring manager's calendar is completely full. And time kills all deals. We know this.
Yeah.
So the way that I think about it is, what mechanisms can you put in place in your process that enables you to see everybody, the entire hiring pool, talent pool for a job, before you make the decision as to who moves forward? Now, the piece that we were talking about was using time to control the input. So you actually have time postings, an application deadline, and you don't start resume review until after that application deadline. And I used all sorts of data points to determine how long a job should be open for to attract the right amount of talent. But it doesn't matter if you've got that process in place or not. The key to me is having the the capability to organize the pool effectively. And that means looking at resumes more than once. Not all the resumes, but some of the resumes. So my first pass through a bucket of applications is to review one key criteria. What's that kind of binary criteria that's you've either got it or you don't have it? And it's the one that can take out the most number of applications in one pass. And I can move very, very quickly if I'm just thinking about one key criteria. And it's an objective criteria, the core qualification, responsibility, skill, whatever it happens to be for that particular job. And then everybody that doesn't have that, I can reject. Creating a much smaller pool. And then that much smaller pool, I can put into another bucket. So this is where I'm organizing that talent pool. Then I go through that group, and now I hold the whole of the job description in my head. But it's a much smaller group of people to think about all of the multiple facets of the job. And then assess that group and move the very best people forward to the next stage, or the fully qualified people forward to the next bucket. And then that bucket, I'm like, well, how many are in there? If there's 200, I've probably got to shrink that down because, again, I'm using data to determine how many people need to be interviewed. If there's only 12, I'm like, well, I thought I was going to interview 10, so 12 is probably good. Move all 12 forward. And all I've done there is I've created these spaces to organize that pool effectively without having to push everybody into the process of interviews because I couldn't see holistically who the best were. And this is just this type of process has been in TA longer than my 25 years and probably prior to software. It's just the typical pull, long list, short list interviews process that human resources departments were doing before there were in-house recruiting teams.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I guess you're right. We do not have to reinvent the wheel every single day and do something new. But I think that you kind of did it a bit fresher, right? Because all of those steps you just described, if I understand correctly, are happening in your head, right? So you do the review, you do the long list, you do the short list. So you have the full thing already kind of mapped out. And then you decide with whom you gonna speak, with which folks you do the, let's call it, get to know call, to the first call, if it's recruiting for some other department, right? How do you make sure, if you're hiring for, let's say, an engineering team, that you fully understand what you are looking for in the CVs and how to narrow down that a funnel to a size that you can handle?
So there's a couple of things in there. The mechanical element for me, I'm lucky that I've got Ashby to use because Ashby enables me to put a custom process in where I can just put multiple resume review steps in series. So the candidates drip into these buckets as I advance them forward with a single click. So that's the process flow. I don't have to keep it all in my head. And the other thing is I can assign that task to the hiring manager at the shortlist stage, for example. So they take the action much earlier in the process. So they own the quality at the top end and they know how much work has gone into doing, and they can choose between those candidates. But coming back to making sure that I'm aligned to the role, calibration on the job in the first place, asking the open questions to the hiring manager, doing a deep dive into exactly what they're looking for, distilling it down into the 3, 4, 5 critical pieces of experience. What does the person have to code in? What's the tech stack environment they have to have? Where is their flexibility there? Building that out. And each element of experience and pressure testing each point is key. And then coming in at a different angle, why would someone want the job? Why wouldn't they want the job? And so asking lots of different open questions to get that qualification piece there first and foremost. And what I don't do, is to use profiles that I've come up with before that conversation as examples. But what I will do after that conversation is to actually go off and source 3, 4, 5 different profiles, whether they're available or not, and just say, okay, here are, to test my understanding of this, here are some people that if I was reviewing the resume based on our last conversation, I would screen these people in. Here's why. And that gives them an opportunity to say, no, you've misunderstood this. Or, yep, this is perfect. They look great. Carry on with that kind of pattern matching. And ultimately, that's all it is. It's pattern matching.
Yeah, sure. So I guess if you have a proper kickoff meeting and if you know whom you're looking for, not only from a, let's say, personal perspective, but from a technical perspective and also from a team perspective, that you find the right person for the only open slot you have in the team, you have a much better way of evaluating people and of kind of finding the person who fits the most. I'm not saying you need to have the best person on earth. You need to have the person that is the best fitting missing piece for that specific role. And then you can make it happen much faster.
Yeah. I see most TA teams just reviewing an early proportion of their applicant pools, the first 10%, the first 100, the first 20%, whatever it happens to be. But if you think about what you just said there, there's one best person in that pool. They don't have to be the best person on earth, but they're probably the one best person in that pool. And statistically, they're unlikely to be in the first 10 or 20% of your applicant. So you've got to have a mindset of reviewing everybody. And whether you do it with a time posting model and only resume review after that point, or whether you leave a job on and then chunk that work up in that every week I'm going to spend 2 hours making sure I zero out this bucket. You have to go through those steps to be statistically likely to hire the best objectively person in your pool. And you're not going to know who that is based on paper. That's the other thing to feel really comfortable with. Based on paper, it's unlikely you'll be able to tell who's best. Perhaps the hiring manager will when they get to review at that resume stage, when you've shrunk the bucket down and taken a lot of the noise out.
So you're saying, well, you use the time boxed model. So to say you open a requisition and you let it open for a week, 2 weeks, no matter how long, and then you close it, and then you start evaluating all the applications. I'm not sure whether I fully agree with that approach. I do it differently. Because what happens if you close the requisition and even the best person in the pool is not fitting, right? Do you start from scratch again, or how do you kind of balance that out?
That's a great question. So the lack of fit from an entire pool, you got the job description completely wrong, right? Now, there's some things that can cause that. The most important piece of a job description is the title. If you're using a title that is opaque, that is overly creative, that does not describe fundamentally in industry standard, clear language, the job, then you're doing yourself a disservice. I have a great example of this. We had in my time at Google, we had a GPS learning navigation specialist job. GPS learning navigation specialist. And we had these amazing geospatial machine learning engineers applying for this job. Sadly, it was a training role, coordinator role. You were going to book rooms for training programs because GPS stood for Google People Services, not Global Positioning Satellite. Learning navigation, L&D, learning and development, learning navigation. You were booking rooms. That's what this job was. But you had these incredible engineers. Job titles are everything. So if you've got it wrong, you've got it wrong from the get-go. You can do sampling to course correct early, but I don't leave it for 2 weeks. Invariably, I'm putting a shorter closing date on there so that I can actually get in and look and go, wow, this is amazing. You can always make it go longer if you need more. There's nothing to stop that. It becomes an iterative process. So iterating in that sense. I thought the question you were going to ask is, what happens if you get into the interview process and everyone gets rejected at some point? Do you have to go and start again? That's where I use predictive analytics to tell me whether or not I've got a hire in the process based on historical data. And I'm looking for that data to tell me that I've got 2 to 3 hires from my pool, because I want to create choice at the end, choice being the biggest driver of quality of hire. So if the analytics suggests that I've got less than 2 hires in my pool, that then triggers me to go and reopen the job for a short period of time to create a second cohort.
Yeah, makes sense. And I also remember that you basically calculate backwards, right? So you have the number of let's say last stage candidates you want to have, and then you use your conversion rates to calculate how many people do I need in the previous stage, how many do I need in the previous stage, to limit the number of conversations to the, let's say, bare minimum, maximum, whatever it is.
One person, if I've got one open headcount, I'll be aiming to have 3 people who are above the bar and hireable, which probably means I need about 6 people at the on-site interview stage. And I work that all the way back to the start of the process to tell me how many interview slots I need to allocate for this job. For argument's sake, 21, because it's 7 people at that stage through to 1 at the end. Therefore, 21 is the right number of first interviews, because that gives me 3 hireable candidates at the end. And then how long do I need the job to be open for to give me the 21? And then sourcing and referrals and everything else is cream on top. Focus the math on the inbound pool. Because then what happens is that you can exceed your quality expectations in the 21 and do even better than 3 at the end of the process. And that's where, real choice and you start to drive fantastic representation numbers there as well.
So What do you do with, let's say, referrals for a role, or if you also do some direct search in parallel? That
Yep.
can't be done in the 1 week that you have the requisition open, right? So you
Oh,
actually
Christian.
need to plan some stuff before. So how do you do that?
So referrals get the same opportunity as any
Mm,
inbound application.
yeah.
We don't do referral bonuses. I'm not a fan of those. I don't hard code. I don't give any preferential treatment.
Mm,
They're treated exactly the same way
yeah.
as any inbound application. Right. I'm a firm believer that referrals are a form of bias and actually cause you to cut corners and end up with lower quality of hires because
Mm,
you've just been efficient. Anyway, sourcing. We source in advance of a job opening.
mhm,
So we plan because we've got these roles opening and closing on a regular cadence. We plan which roles are going to open which weeks and which roles are going to close which weeks. And we
mhm,
plan ahead of time to have the time to do the resume review. Sourcing happens in advance of the job opening, and the
mhm,
hiring manager gets to review sourced candidates a batch 20, 30, 40 when they're building out the job description and having
mhm,
a calibrating and so on. They will select some of those candidates and say, yeah, these people are perfect for it. The day the job goes live, the source candidates get a sequence message start that says, we think you're great for this job. Here's why.
mhm,
Here's the job description. Please note the application closing date. That creates a
mhm,
sense of urgency in the passive talent pool. But it's exactly the same moment that that everyone
mhm.
else in the world is seeing this job. And then we have the direct booking link.
Okay.
And that direct booking link enables those people to book directly into the interview process. So your source candidates is a very, very tight targeted shortlist for the roles
Mhm,
that we do source on. And with the responses that we're getting, we don't source on the vast majority of roles these days,
yeah.
because we're just getting fantastic inbound and referrals anyway. But the source candidates are therefore in process at the same time, and everything rolls together. And all
Mhm,
of a sudden, you've got inbound referrals and source candidates in pipeline, same
yeah.
stage, and becoming part of that cohort to work through together.
Got it. Yeah. Um, so when it comes to referrals, I'm a fan of paying referral bonuses, but I still take the candidates out of the hands of the referrers, right? Or even out of the hiring manager's hands. They have the same process. They need to answer the same questions. They have exactly the same process as everybody else to actually avoid bias and to kind of keep it fair and transparent. That's for sure. Um,
The data
and
I've seen suggests that in excess of 75% of employer referrals are
mm,
driven by the candidate seeing the job and then going and finding a connection who works at that company
mm,
and asking that person to refer them. So those were inbound applicants by a different name. Why
mm,
would you pay a bonus?
yeah, for those no, but if
But how do you
I
know?
yeah.
Because you can't see that journey that's happening behind the scenes.
Mm, so I'm speaking about let's call them real referrals, right? I have a colleague who has a former colleague he worked with like 2 years ago, and that person is interested in working for us now. That's for me a real referral, and for that kind of introduction, I'm willing to pay money. It's still cheaper than an agency or a headhunter, right?
We can labor the point, but those are actually the ones I was talking about. They're
Ah,
still
okay.
ex-colleagues. It's just the candidate is the person who sees the job first,
Mm,
not the employee sees the job and then thinks, that person would be great for this. I'm
yeah.
going to refer. More than 75% from all the data I've seen, and I've been
Mm,
thankful to get cookie access and these things in not my current job, but previously, to see this in action,
mm,
and it's the candidate driving that. So I'll leave it there.
yeah, all good. I guess we're on the same page more or less. Apart from the paying piece, right? I have one more question, and that's looping back to your job description piece. Um, You said the title is the most important thing. In
Yep.
Germany, we have, let's call it, tendency to create super fancy titles for roles that have been in existence for more than 20 years. Is it helpful? Does it help to call an engineer something very fancy, ninja, coding, warrior, C++, whatever? So what's your opinion on that?
It's a software engineer. Call it a software engineer. You'd be there are people that would be turned off by calling it a warrior, or
Yeah.
you can't. It simply, if it's a software engineer, call it a software engineer. My previous company I worked for was Full Story, and they had a session replay company as part of the functionality of their product. So I got to see, using the product, candidates landing on our career site and how much time they spent on our job descriptions before getting to the apply button.
Yeah.
Aggregated up at mass levels. Under 7 seconds on our career site before hitting apply, from 66% of the people who landed on the career site.
Yeah.
And the only thing they were really looking at, and I can see the heat maps, was the job title.
Yeah.
So if you've got a non-standard job title, you're damaging your SEO capability, because the job matching engines are going to push high quality candidates to you that are well matched. Think about reverse sourcing. It's all Boolean logic. It's all matching capability, but your job description is getting pushed into inboxes. If you've got fancy titles, you're making those tools have to work that much harder to match them to people.
Yeah.
Keep it simple. The job description gets pushed into their inbox. They look at it, they apply, move on. The fancy titles don't even get to the inbox. You're now having to spend money sourcing on agencies, paying referrers to get those applications in. It's just simple SEO.
Yeah, you're completely right. But Germany is sometimes a bit different when it comes to recruiting.
In many countries, kinds of activities, cat herders and whatever else is the job title. I just advise keep it simple, and even going as far as like full stack developer and things like that. Just call it a software engineer, back end, front end, full stack. Keep it simple. Yeah,
simplicity usually is much better than some whatever overrated, overthought thing that you put online. Thank you very much. I have one last thing, and that is, what would be your tips for recruiting organizations that maybe are not as well known as yours and have to struggle with getting enough applications to really find the best person for the open role?
Transparency. The more transparent you can be, the more you will get people to stop and say, wow, I've never seen that before. If you hook people in on the job and they start to read deeper and deeper, and you've got transparency in your job descriptions, on your company website and so on, you'll get applications from people who've never heard of you but see themselves working at your organization. That wow piece is a quote from Adam Horn on one of our Ashby podcasts, Software Accepted. And Adam runs open.org, so he's a transparency expert. I truly believe, if you look at some of our job descriptions, and in fact, we were talking before this, I have one closing in 35 minutes, the job description went incredibly viral last week. It was a standard job title. The job description said everything about the job. It covered how you should apply, why you should apply, what the interview process will be, why you want the job, why you wouldn't want the job. There were 5 bullet points on there telling you why not to apply. Save your time, go apply for a different job. All of this hooked people in, and I think my LinkedIn post about it was shared well over 100 times. 1,000 comments, thousands of likes, hundreds of comments. You can quickly build a brand through people noticing and then sharing and so on. And like the closing dates, those are just elements of transparency. But yeah, take a deep dive into that. We've got a bunch of different examples on our career site. We obviously cycle the jobs, but you'll see why you shouldn't apply, why you should apply, and deep transparency about process in everything that we do. Cool.
Jim, thank you very much. It was a pleasure speaking with you. We are really at the end of our slot. We are pretty on time. That's good. So thank you very much again, and have a great rest of the day.
You were amazing, Christian. For this to be your first podcast, honestly, you're the best first podcast hoster that I've ever done a first podcast with.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Das war's für heute. Vielen Dank, dass ihr bis zum Ende dabei geblieben seid und bis zum nächsten Mal.